Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm wrapping up all the books I read in August, which ended up being a little bit of a middling month for me. My number of books I read definitely went up. My quality was not as good. So I feel like overall, I'm glad that I'm reading more. I want to be more active in the last part of the year in getting things off of my unread shelves and either moved on to my read shelves or unhauled. But definitely the quality was a little more middling this month. But that said, the things I enjoyed, I really enjoyed. So the first book I read this month was Living Dead in Dallas by Charlaine Harris, and this one is the second book in the Sookie Stackhouse series, which is this very silly series if you haven't heard of it or if you're unfamiliar. This is the book series that the TV show True Blood is based off of. We're following Sookie Stackhouse, who is a telepath. She can read people's minds, and she gets involved with a group of vampires in this small town in Louisiana, and then gets involved in solving various mysteries from there. So in this one, she gets sent off to Dallas to look for a missing vampire, and I found the structure of this one very weird, because there's actually a completely separate mystery that gets set up in this bit of the book, and then the Dallas mystery gets wrapped up, and we still have this much left, and that's the resolution of the first mystery. So a murder happens in Bontemps. Somebody who is a friend of Sookie's is murdered at the very beginning of the book, and somebody she doesn't really like is implicated in the murder. And she immediately gets shipped off to Dallas. She and Bill go to Dallas to deal with the situation per the request of Eric, who is the Area 5 sheriff. And then she gets back from having done all of that from this kind of wild chase through Dallas looking for a missing gay cowboy vampire. I love him. Farrell is perfect. I really liked that he got included. So she goes on this hunt for this missing guy and ends up encountering a really creepy cult and another vampire, a really ancient vampire who has motives of his own. And I think that mystery is fairly well done, but it's really weird to go from oh, there's a murder to forget the murder, we're gonna go to Dallas and look for a missing person. She finds what happened to said missing person. Things ensue with the cult, because cult, and then she just goes back home and there's still another mystery to be solved. I did enjoy that this sets up some conflict between her and Bill, and I found it very interesting that Bill in the first book is kind of a wet blanket. He's just the most boring vampire. My friends and I call him Bill the Dillard's vampire, because I think in book one he's described as having bought his clothes at Dillard's, he shops at Dillard's, we're told that. And in this book, he's terrible. He's actually quite manipulative and abusive in a way that I was finding really grating. So I found it interesting that I went from being kind of ambivalent towards Bill to actively hating him in book 2 because of his behavior towards Sookie. And we get more of Eric Northman, the Viking vampire. He starts showing up a lot more in this book. He's more involved in the mystery solving and everything. And I actually liked the last chunk of the book the best, because I didn't feel like that mystery was handled as well as the middle portion mystery, but we get a lot more of Eric and Sookie interacting, and I think that their relationship is just much more interesting, and Eric is a more interesting character than Bill is. Bill just shows up to be boring and also kind of a jerk, and Eric shows up and is like, how can I cause some chaos today? What can I do to be a little gremlin today? And I love that for him. So I feel like the strongest bits were the mystery of the middle portion and the last little chunk, not because of the mystery, but just because we got to see a lot of Eric being a little chaos gremlin. So it was really fun for that reason, and I had a great time reading this. It was very funny because I was finishing this while my friend was doing LSAT prep. I was at her house, and she had a 2-hour LSAT prep thing to do. I had 100 pages left. I'm just sitting in her house reading this. We're having very different experiences because she's doing a very difficult logic exam, practice exam, and I'm sitting there giggling over whatever nonsense Eric is doing now. And we had a very different experience, and then I had to follow her around telling her about this, because this was our cursed book club pick. And so I was filling her in, we were putting some stuff in the group chat and filling everybody else in on the ending of the book. And it was a fun time. It's not a good book, but it was a fun time to read it. The next thing I read was much more lighthearted. This is The Kamigawa Food Detectives by Hisashi Kashiwai, and I really enjoyed this. This is a series of short stories following a father-daughter duo who recreate foods from people's pasts so that they can re-experience that, kind of connect back to that memory. And in each story, you typically have someone who has a specific reason for wanting to re-experience a specific food. It has something to do with someone who was close to them or someone special to them, and they're wanting to taste these foods again for like various reasons. Like there's one person who wants to just like reconnect with somebody from their past before moving into the new chapter of their life. There's somebody else who is like mourning a missed connection. Like there's just all of these different kinds of relationships and things that emerge around food, and the ways that this father and daughter are helping people like work through their emotions through food. It's just so interesting. I think the one thing that didn't work for me as well for this is just that it's extremely repetitive. Like every story has exactly the same structure, and for the most part I found that fine, but there were like even bits of dialogue they were getting repeated. Like somebody had the same comment every single story. So it just got a little bit repetitive for me by the time you get through like 6 stories of it. But I definitely am going to be picking up the sequel to this, which I think is coming out later this year. This was just so like warm and cozy and just calm. This was exactly what I needed to read at the time that I read it, because I'd been reading a lot of much darker books. And so this was nice to have something kind of light and fluffy and just heartwarming and nice. And I really enjoyed this. I think that the emotions that it's exploring, the kind of topics it engages with, are just really interesting, and the ways it kind of orients all of that around food was just, I think, really well done and just a great time. The next 2 books I read were both for a video, which I will link because I'm not going to go super into depth here. I will link my vlog reading these 2 books somewhere, I think in the cards above and in the description down below if I remember to, but check that out if you want further thoughts on that. But I did a video basically asking the question, is my best friend always right? Because when I was putting together my August TBR, the D20 I rolled for that gave me 2 books that she had recommended to me that were both fantasy romance books. And so I read both of them to see if my opinions on them would line up with hers. They did, spoiler alert, but you can check out that video up in the cards above. Again, if I remember to link it. I'm going to try really hard to remember to link it. But first thing I read for that was A Strange and Stubborn Endurance by Foz Meadows. This one she had hated. She rants about it like periodically, and I ultimately felt kind of the same. I feel like most of this book is pretty weak. There's some really good, solid pieces to it, and I think some of the interactions between the 2 main characters, Velisyn and Cathari, are really interesting. There's a couple of scenes that I did really like that I think are funny and kind of sweet and heartwarming, but for the most part, the world building in this didn't make a lot of sense, and that so much of the like plot and mystery was built around the world building made it just feel, it felt like the author came up with an idea for a thing and then proceeded to not think about like the implications of any of that, because we basically have like a good country and evil country, and a character goes from evil country to good country and then is like introduced to how the world is actually supposed to be or something. And it just didn't work because so many things in Good Country were actually quite messed up, but the book didn't act like that was true, and it didn't really engage with that at all. It just was like good country is unequivocally good, bad country is unequivocally bad, and that's kind of like the assumptions that the book runs with. There's actually a very messed up justice system though in Good Country, and it just doesn't engage with the implications of that at all. I'm going to stop there because I could just rant about this for a while, and I need to not do that because there is a whole video you can go check out to see my full thoughts on this, and I don't need to do another, that video is very long. I'm so sorry I ranted for so long about this book. The second book I read for that video though was Sword Dance by A.J. DeMoss, and I loved it. I was obsessed with this. I devoured it in like 2 days. It took me ages to read A Strange and Stubborn Endurance. I read Sword Dance, which is also much shorter. It's only like 300 pages. I read it in like 2 days. I could not put that book down. It was so fun. In this one, we're following characters whose names I cannot remember because I keep coming up with Dinios, and I know that's not correct because that's the Tainted Cup, Dinios Cole. Bear with me as I've completely forgotten these characters' names. I love this book, I promise. I promise I really enjoyed it. This is very silly that I can't remember their names. Demiskos and Varazda. I've got it now. Okay. We're back on track. So this one is following Demiskos, who is like a former military leader who has been badly injured in the war, and he's honorably discharged and is now working in the quartermaster's office, and he gets sent off to a friend's house to like buy fish sauce from her. She has a fish sauce factory, and he gets there, and there's like very clearly some politics happening here with all of the guests at her villa, and this is very much not his thing. Like, he is not a politics guy, and he just gets chucked into the deep end and has to deal with this kind of unraveling situation between a bunch of different factions, and he, through all of this, meets a guy named Varazda, who is a eunuch, and he is a sword dancer, and the two of them start working together to try and figure out what's going on and, like, manage the situation. Also, they fall in love. It's very cute. It's very sweet. I just found this relationship to be much more believable because they're both constantly screwing up and saying the wrong thing and upsetting each other and offending each other and having to, like, work through that. But they're much better at communicating. Like, they just speak very directly about things. They're both fairly, like, straightforward people. And the ways that they dealt with that kind of awkwardness was really good. And it just felt like more believable as a kind of romance that would emerge from these two people who were kind of forced into close proximity in a very dangerous and stressful situation and having to, like, work together and deal with that. So I just felt this was way more believable. It was also way more fun, I felt like, because you weren't just having, like, bad things constantly happening to one guy and watching him get beat down for 500 pages. So that helped a lot. And there were some really cute, sweet moments between Nemiscus and Varazda that were just so cute. I had to, like, put the book down for a minute and just process. And yeah, I had a great time with this one. It was so much fun. So those are the two books I read from that video. And then after that, I moved on to, I don't remember, whatever's next in this stack. Manga. I read 2 volumes of manga right after that because I wanted something a little bit lighter, and I was in the midst of a couple of other things I still haven't finished. Those are going to be, I think, in my September wrap-up probably. But I decided to pick up some manga over the weekend. I had picked up 2 new volumes when I went to the bookstore with my mom. So I got volume 5 of Jujutsu Kaisen and volume 2 of Phantom Tales of the Night. I'm just going to talk about these together because ultimately my opinions kind of the same. I loved both of these, 5 stars. I'm really enjoying both of these series. This one, it was interesting because we're following Jujutsu sorcerers who normally are, like, fighting curses, but this is kind of a breakdown in that formula because there's, like, a event with a sister school, and there's a lot of animosity between the Tokyo and the Kyoto schools, so there's, like, just students trying to kill each other, and we're finding out a lot more about, like, the different techniques of the different students and the kind of backstories of some of them. And I just really enjoyed this glimpse into those characters and watching kind of the different relationships be developed, because there's, like, existing relationships that Yuji hasn't seen, but there's also, like, Yuji forming new relationships with people from the Kyoto school and kind of furthering his relationships with the people at the Tokyo school. And I just really enjoyed the, like, social dynamics of this one. And then Phantom Tales of the Night, volume 3, continues on with this lovely vignette style of storytelling that it does, where you get kind of these different stories and you start to realize that bits and pieces of them are all kind of connected. And we also got a continuation of the overarching plot where somebody is trying to find and fight the owner of the Murakumo Inn. We also got Spider's backstory in this one, which I was really interested in, and I just like the ways that this kind of developed some of the characters a little bit more. We saw a little more of the world, and I like some of the topics that this one discusses, including there's a really interesting story in here that's basically about, like, why we need to treat other people well, because you just never know what somebody else is going through, and the kind of, like, impact you can have on someone's life without really realizing it. So I just really enjoyed the discussions that it was bringing up through these kind of, like, creepy stories. And yeah, both of these were just, like, a lot of fun. I read them both on the same day within, like, a couple of hours, and it was just, like, a really fun, easy breezy Saturday. I had a great time with these. The very last thing I read in August was A Dreadful Splendor by B.R. Myers, and this one I was sad about. This was a disappointment. It was still good. I still think this is a book a lot of people will love. This is one that I gave 3.5 stars, but we're following Genevieve Timmons, who is a fake spiritualist, and this was another one that I did a whole video of, so I'll go pretty briefly here, but you can check that out, and I promise it's not as long as the Is My Friend Was Right video. It's much shorter, but this one I found just to be disappointing because we're following Genevieve, fake spiritualist. She goes to ostensibly help a guy get over the grief of losing his fiance, but actually he thinks his fiance was murdered and he wants her to fake a seance and a haunting to get a killer to confess, so they end up working together, and also there's a romance between them. Pretty standard. I really like the atmosphere in this one. I think that the mystery was interesting as well. Like, it's kind of creepy and spooky, and there's lots of, like, fog, and it's like a crumbling seaside manor. I really liked the atmosphere. The mystery in this one was pretty interesting, although I did guess where it was going, like, very early on. There's one element in here that I think kind of gives you enough that you can guess. There's, like, some diary entries from somebody that I think gives you enough information you can kind of figure out what's going on. So I guess what was happening from very early. but the characters feel very inconsistent, and in particular I found Genevieve frustrating because she's supposed to be good at reading people, but she kept missing really obvious connections, and it was just annoying to have figured something out like hundreds of pages before her when it was really, really obvious. So I didn't enjoy the characters very much. There's only one scene in here where I believed the romance, and ultimately I didn't love the way the book ended. So it was a very mixed bag for me, and I'm glad that I read it. This was one I acquired recently, so it's one that is not like languishing on my shelves, but I'm sad that I didn't enjoy this more because it had the makings of a book I really could have loved, and it just needed, I think, a little bit better fine-tuning. So those are all the books that I read in August. I'm happy that I read so many books in August. I'm a little sad at how many of them were kind of a flop for me, but I am happy that, you know, the ones that I didn't love, they can go off my shelf now. So ultimately it's kind of fine. It's kind of a win-win, really, because they're just not taking up space anymore. I am going to be unhauling both A Strange and Separate Endurance and A Dreadful Splendor. Going to go straight to the donate box, which I'm actually taking today, which is why this needed to be filmed today, so that I can go donate those books. So that's pretty much all I have for you today. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite book was that you read in August. I would love to know. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on... Well, I almost did my usual outro. I'm actually currently posting on Saturdays with the occasional Tuesday video, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.